Ladies and gentlemen, we're moving on to our second session now. We are moving on to the topic of ensuring the resilience in the cloud, the strategies and the best practices for robust cloud security as we speak about integrity, confidentiality of data and applications. Robust cloud security requires a combination of strategies and best practices, and we're about to see what are the possible ways of achieving them. Now, to take you through this session, we'd like to invite our guest speaker to join us on stage to take us through some interesting insights on the similar topic. Our guest speaker brings with him over 23 years of experience in technology leadership, consulting, and sales. He is leading the Google Cloud Security business for India and SAARC. He's a certified practitioner, the Open Group Architecture Framework for Enterprise Architectures. And before joining Google, he led the cybersecurity solution Salesforce for commercial and service provider segments at Cisco India, where he was instrumental in conceptualizing integrated security solution architectures across endpoint, network, and cloud. Earlier, at Cisco, he incubated and led the high-touch technical support teams, and he holds an engineering degree in electronics and telecom, along with an MBA from SPE Jain Institute for Management and Research in Mumbai. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for our guest speaker joining us here today, Mr. Anubahve Wahie, for you.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. Oh no, that needs to be a little better. Good afternoon. A little better. Good afternoon. Wonderful. It was a great lunch, as we can see. Thank you so much for coming in. It is so motivating to see a crowd full of people who are interested in cybersecurity. I'm sure it's been a great learning session through the day. I have another 29 minutes to give you a perspective on security from a lens which I got introduced to almost about a year and a half back. And I promise you, this is a very interesting lens to look at. Now, let's start with a little bit of a philosophical question. Why are we here? Think about it. We are here sitting to learn, drive collective learning on cybersecurity. But there must be a compelling event that brought us to this stage. Let's start with a little bit of a history lesson. In 1960, the US government was very, very concerned that while we were moving leaps and bounds on connecting devices and connecting computers, we were also introducing a challenge for ourselves around privacy, around integrity of data that these computers were holding, and around areas of malicious practices that could be developed because these computers are now getting connected. Fast forward, there's also a journal written on this subject which talks about how the entire networking capability that was developed is great, but it doesn't have any autonomous capability to drive self-defense systems. And that's where the genesis of cybersecurity started coming into being. Now, fast forward from that era to where we are today. Digital transformation has been the name of the game for most of us today. Most organizations are benching their entire business transformation given what digital transformation, given what cybersecurity capabilities are hoping to build for their organizations. Now let's take a step back to understand what crisis means from a cybersecurity perspective. And I'll take a leaf out of what Google learned in 2008. Think about a scenario where an organization is being attacked by a nation state. And this happened to us in 2009, which compelled Google to relook at how we were defining cybersecurity for ourselves. Let me give you a sneak peek to what happened then. This is a YouTube video which outlines, it's just a teaser, but it outlines a 6-series episode that brings out all the elements of the attack for you. Well, the emotions speak because it really required the entire organization to come together and not only fight back, but also ensure that this never happened again. I'd urge you to watch this. It's a 6-episode series. It's available on YouTube. You can watch it with your family, especially since most of you are cybersecurity practitioners. It's a good way to tell your family what you do day in and day out. So I urge you to watch it. But now, moving on from here, there were two compelling areas that Google wanted to relook post this attack. One was redefining the entire SecOps strategy, or the security operations strategy at Google, which means we were in a data deluge. We had so much of data to consume. How do we really make it easier for us to drive effective detections from a security operations perspective? Second, how do we redefine access at Google? And that's the more interesting part that each of you would be keen to hear. I also am going to make a pledge. I'm going to reduce the number of times I use the word zero trust in this conversation, but yet talk about the importance of safe access with it. Because I want to ensure that we try to conceptualize the outcome we're trying to drive with zero trust, because it may mean different things for different organizations. So let's break this into two parts. Let's first start with what needs to change. We've all learned that the business transformation that's being driven, typically digital transformation has a key role to play. The industry saw transitions. We saw transitions from web to mobile with, I think most of you who are on social media have seen your social media apps are typically mobile-based. I've rarely seen people going onto their laptops or computers to open a social media app anymore. Two, where we see the cloud coming and playing a critical role in driving this transformation. Now, with this transformation comes in another compelling event, which is around the entire multi-decade market around cybersecurity. It is going to be a field in itself. It's going to be a function in itself, which is going to play a key role in driving this transformation. And it will compel all of us, if it's not done so far, to redefine how we look at our security postures, to redefine how we look at our security operations, and start accepting and working towards building digitally immune systems. Now, that's a heavy word or a heavy phrase, but think about it. At some point in time, we have to ensure that the systems that we are building, think about where I started, 1960, we created computers. We got them to talk to each other. Now we are creating networks, irrespective of where they rest, which are also talking to each other. You've got applications talking to each other. And when you're now building this entire ecosystem, it has to be built with a safety by design concept so that as far as possible, it's digitally immune. That's where we need to go. Now, why is there a cybersecurity storm? This is the most cliched slide that anybody would come and present, but I took the risk of doing so. But I'm going to bring out a few elements of why this is important. If you look at the entire actor landscape, most of us are used to hearing about attacks that happen because a ransomware hit the organization. E-crime actors would come on with variants of these malware and attack organizations. It's whatever attacks which are related to critical infrastructures or nation states are typically driven by nation-state actors. Now, the pivot that we are seeing moving in is called the nation-state pivot, where these nation-state actors are now focusing back on organizations because there's clearly money to be made. So what? Well, the so what here is the ways and means that you've built to protect yourselves against a ransomware attack may not work in these scenarios. And that's where you have to up your game around your security operations strategy, point one. Point two, as you continue evolving digitally, as more applications connect, you will create more data. It is not unknown for you to be able to have effective detections with whatever data you had so far. Imagine when it becomes 100x. In that data deluge, how are you going to scale to drive efficient threat detection? And the third is my personal favorite. I love this. We've been talking about shortage of talent and skills in security for the last 10 years. What have we done about it? what have we done to go back and ensure that we open the gates, remove the barrier to entry, and let more people come in and contribute towards cyber defense? And use technology to help us do this. And there's a way to do it. I'll talk about it as we progress. Now, since I'm talking about effective detection capabilities in security operations, I hope some of you can relate to what I'm sharing here. When we build our security operations strategy, it is built with a mindset that I have X amount of data to protect. These are my typical use cases that go around threat detection. And then we spin up a tool, and we expect that the native capabilities of the tool will help me do their detections. Fast forward a year, you get into expansion mode, you add more data, and then comes a question back to the CFO that I need more money because my licensing cost is going up, or my tool is not scaling because I have more data now coming in from the cloud, or now I've realized that I need endpoint security and my endpoint security tool is also pumping in data to me. And the CFO says, I'm sorry, the budget was X. I can't afford to give you more money. And there, you create what is typically called the defender's dilemma, where you cherry pick what you want to see in your security operations center. Does anybody relate with this? You are deciding that I can't have everything come into my security operations center because either my SOC tool doesn't scale, or because I don't have more money, because it will impact my licensing cost. And that defeats the purpose of end-to-end visibility that you want to see in the cloud, in the SOC. The second element is accepting that if you are embracing the cloud, there is a level of cloud skills that you need to learn. And here is why. And this is a survey that was done with close to about 400 CISOs across the region, which outlined that yes, to continue your business transformation, you do need to have cloud skills, but more specifically, for effective security operations in the future, if you're using the cloud, your security team needs to understand the cloud as well. You cannot force fit a team which has typically been working on firewalls, IPSs, maybe proxies and email security solutions, all of a sudden asked to work in the world of cloud security if they don't understand it. And I'm not trying to allude that the cloud is not secure. What I'm trying to bring out is when you're building security operations, you have to accept that things may be done a little differently. Now, the logical next question is why? And this slide takes a humble attempt to address that. Yes, we've heard of threats changing, we've heard of attack surface changing. Now think about the cloud environment. Consider for a minute that you've spread across 3 public cloud environments today. So it's a multi-cloud setup. While each cloud provider would give you essentially similar services, whether it's network, compute, or storage, each one of them do security in their own way. So you can't have a one-size-fits-all strategy from a detection perspective. 2, there are certain cloud-specific threats that we have to accept. They could be around misconfigurations. They could be around overly defined permissions, unauthorized access, which is a game in itself. And you have to now figure out how you're going to detect those areas in your security operations. Bringing you back to the SOC, which was pretty much designed to work beautifully well in an on-premise setup. Now this SOC needs to have detection capabilities or detection rules that can embrace these new threat types. And the fourth point is nothing to do with technology at all. It's a culture of collaboration, and we have to accept it. I have experienced situations where the security team and the IT team at times may not have the best experience of collaboration. Imagine in the new world where critical functions, critical business functions are going to be run by teams who are working on the cloud. These functions are sitting on the cloud. That collaboration now has to extend all the way to your security operations center. You can't have those teams not talking to each other. So yes, we heard of shadow IT. Extend this a little further. Think about critical applications running from the cloud and your security operations teams not even having a view to it. And then you still hold the onus back and accountability back to those teams. Just extending this a little further. There's acceptance of endpoint security. Let's have agents deployed across all endpoints in the organization because there's valuable telemetry to be picked up. But if all of this is running in a cloud environment, which is completely SaaS-based, where are you going to run your agents? Or there is this entire view that I want to sniff everything on the perimeter. I want to catch it before it enters my organization. Well, there's pervasive encryption all across now. What are you going to sniff? So with these examples, I'm sure you realize that as we keep moving on, keep adding more data, keep moving towards transformation, we will have to take a step back and understand our traditional detection methodologies may not be applicable anymore. One last example before I start converging on this. We all feel that we build a security operations setup, we pick up the best-in-class tool, we do our evaluations basis what really is best of its capability in terms of how many detection rules it can offer and so on and so forth. But then you're relying completely on the ability of the tool provider to conceptualize what are the detection scenarios that have to be baked into the SOC, which is not going to be working. So I'm taking a leaf out of a very famous article written by Anton Chuvakan, who's a senior strategist at Google. And he brings on this concept of detection engineering very effectively. He's trying to outline the fact that you need to have a function in your organization which looks continuously at engineering the detection rules. They have to keep changing. As you change your defending landscape, as the attacker landscape changes. So you cannot rely on, and I'm just throwing in a number, 100 detection rules present on your security operations center tool today and expecting that it will have 100% accuracy on detecting any kind of threat. That doesn't happen. So who's looking at this continuously and who is building up a scientific approach to detection rules in the SOC to understand that, well, the way I run my software code, where there's hygiene, I need to run my detection rules to come back and check whether they are working or not. And if not, how do I tweak them? And on the SecOps strategy, this is my last slide and I'll move to the next subject hereafter, comes in convergence of a proactive cyber defense with the reactive defense that you've been doing in the SOC. Take a step back, and rather than doing this individually, take a step back and try to understand who is attacking you. And that's where threat intel plays a very big role. What are you trying to protect and from whom? Number two, every time you spin up a new asset which you think is critical, what exposure are you creating for the attacker to come and exploit? So it's in simple words, if I am an attacker and I'm standing outside your organization, what can I see which is exposed, which is the low-hanging fruit for me to go after? Three, we spend a lot of money buying tools. We spend a lot of money architecting our security architecture. What is the robustness of this architecture today if a new attacker technique was used to attack your organization? Will it stand tall or will it collapse? It's better that you know that proactively rather than going through an attack to understand this. And last but not the least, you need to have a constant check to know whether you're breached or not, because attackers will be sitting in your environment for almost 6 to 8 months before they actually execute the attack. So imagine all of this being done individually versus being baked into your SOC operations as a continuous exercise with the detection that you see. And that's exactly where we need to take this. So you should have the capability to have larger data volumes available in the SOC where you could do efficient searches. You don't have to worry about scale issues that your SOC tool has. You should be able to do a continuous retrospective analysis of all the observables that you've collated in your SOC over a 1-year period with any new threat intel around a threat actor behavior. You cannot just rely on, okay, I've got new news about WannaCry, I want to see if I'm impacted or not. You've got 1 year of data to go back and check on. You may or you may not find it. You would need capabilities to go back and look at it retrospectively, continuously, to know that yes, 7 months back, I saw the first observable related to this attack type. That's where you need to up the game. we no longer can live in a scenario where we're expecting tools to solve the problem in hand. And then, of course, there's an element of AI which comes into picture, which I'll talk of. How can you really power things with AI, not to remediate, but to solve mundane issues in the SOC? I'll switch gears, and I'll bring it into another interesting subject, because I said I'm going to talk about two topics. One is securing access. Now, this was one way of securing critical infrastructures. Build a huge wall. But unfortunately, in the digital world, walls don't work, they break. And the best example is that it happened to us at Google. Our walls broke in 2009, which is why we had to go back and relook at how we defined security at Google from an access perspective. So from a principles perspective, we picked up 3 principles. One, there is no concept of a privileged network for us. So assume that access from employees, partners, contractors will happen from any network. 2, assume that your entire application ecosystem is externalized. There's nothing sitting in a well-fortified data center. And 3, ensure that every connection that a user makes from their endpoint to the application is a thread-like connection on need basis. So there is no concept of a tunnel. You just don't walk in through the green channel into the data center and go where you want to go. If I need to access a particular application, I need to ensure that it's me, I'm using a trusted endpoint, and I make a thread-like connection to the application. That's where it started. And when John Kinderwerk wrote about the zero trust principles, and this is the second time I'm speaking this, so if somebody's keeping account, in 2013, it was on similar lines. And that's how we defined this entire concept for us at Google. Now, fundamentally, there are a lot of things that you could do if you're trying to look at building similar architectures, but there are certain basics that you have to keep in mind. You need to first define what are you trying to protect and from whom. Need-based access has to be clearly defined. You need to also define ways and means on how users are going to start experiencing this change, because it is not easy. At the end of the day, it's going to impact productivity. So how are you going to build this entire ecosystem, which is based on trust-based access, which does not have any VPN in between, and which is one step further in improving productivity and not taking you a step back? And to help us do that, we did a few things. First of all, we built a small pilot team, and the team was put in place from a different function standpoint. So we had a functional team from a sales standpoint, we had a functional team from engineering standpoint, and we tried to understand what do they access, how do they access, what is the dependency on the tools that they have, and now when we try to build this new stack around access, what impact it has on their experience. So rather than force-fitting a tool and saying, here's your new tool, start using it from tomorrow, take a step back and understand how are people going to use it? How is it going to impact their experience? What are the list of applications which are legacy in nature, but you can't throw them away today, which are going to come in the way? How are you going to address that use case? So it took us 11 years to do all of this. And we're still on that journey. And that's exactly why I made the initial point when I started that this is not a button or a switch that you could just flip and say, yes, I am zero trust ready. This is the third time I use the term. And I hope it's the last time I use that term. The other angle to all of this is, how do you ensure that once you've got secure access, you are not succumbing to malicious domains or being subjected to phishing attacks? Now, we've seen this, and we've seen this example of how MFA fatigue has impacted a few organizations. You've typically built a second line of defense with multi-factor authentication, but fatigue is a very good example of how you could pretty much succumb to that. And the true element there in the OTPs or the second factor that comes in is the human being. And that's where the other step that we took was to adopt security keys, which is a very stringent mechanism to ensure that you can, in real time, marry physical identity and the digital identity by just touching a security key. Think about it. So there is no possibility of your coming in between and stealing an OTP. It doesn't exist. So every time you try and access a particular website or a domain, and you really want to authenticate it's you, just touch the key. And that's a connection between your physical identity and the digital identity. Simple steps, but go a long way in reducing the attack surface. And outcome, I'm sure all of you want to know what was the outcome. We've reported 0 ransomware attacks on our Chrome OS ecosystem, which is a part and parcel of what we built with the Zero Trust architecture that I spoke of, the 4th time I spoke it. My last section, I have 4 minutes to go, and I hope I do due diligence to this section because this is important. There's no conversation without GenAI today. Now, there are 2 approaches here. There's so much you could do with GenAI, but you have to do it with a sense of responsibility, especially in the world of security, because there is this risk of hallucinations which can be counterproductive to what you're trying to do. What do I mean by that? Most GenAI models are built on large learning models, the LLMs, which you are all aware of. And if the LLMs do not understand the world of security, the jargons of security, the dialects of security, if they have not been trained correctly, their responses would be incorrect. And in the world of security, that's the last thing you want. You don't want to be going tangential to what a remediation action should be. So when we embraced this task, we embraced this with a sense of responsibility of solving just 3 issues for now. 1, with the ever-emerging threat landscape, can we avoid patient 1? Patient 0 may not be possible, but can we avoid patient 1, which is where how AI comes in and starts helping you enrich and refine the threat intelligence search that you're doing. So instead of getting, say, 2, 3 pages, 4 pages worth of threat intel information for you to work on, can it be more refined to your environment? Can it be enriched with very specific actions to take? 2, there's endless toil in our existing ecosystems. So there's disparate systems that you're trying to protect, too many tools to look at. Can we make lives easier in terms of reducing that toil for the users? And 3, this entire challenge of talent. Can we ensure that we open the gates, open the doors, get more people in, and have AI be the supporting layer for them for their level 1 concerns, so that L3 analysts have more time on their hands to look at sophisticated attack patterns or more sophisticated challenges that they have to face. And this is how we're trying to do it. Simple example here, something as straightforward as even writing a query on a SOC tool. If you want to do that, can I have an AI model help me do that for you? Or, for that matter, if I have concerned around, yes, there's a long list of alerts that I have to go back and address. If somebody just comes back and tells me, well, if you were not to address this alert, here is the attack path that the attacker would take, these are the resources the attacker would touch, and this is the associated risk score to it. A little simpler, rather than actually going back to the L3 and saying, can you help me figure out what this alert means? So as I said, to keep it very simple steps. We are very bullish about it, but we want to do it with a sense of responsibility. My last slide, as I promised, and I am just about a minute to go. Security is very important for us at Google. I think some of you are using some services of Google's. It could be photo or search, and the last thing anyone would want to see is their own personal emotions on photos go away because there was a compromise. So this is extremely critical. Transition point for us was the attack that hit us in 2009, and that's how we redefined security for ourselves. And I just tried to make a humble attempt to ensure I could give you some learnings that we were able to apply for ourselves back to you. I hope this was useful. My only last comment before I leave the stage is there is no dearth of technology tools available for us today to protect ourselves. Please look at those, but first start with figuring out the importance of operationalizing them. 2, Each time you look at building new capabilities in your security operations center or wherever, think about the new complexities you're going to create and how will you operationalize it. That's all for now. Thank you so much for listening to me. I hope this was helpful.
For more latest news, subscribe to FTTV.